that we're sharing in a collaborative environment where people get to learn, and more importantly, where you guys get to network with each other, right? Because the power is in the network, the power is in the relationships of all the people that are here, right? One of the big things I'm a fan of is for you guys to be building your database of other real estate investors. That's super important. So one thing you could do is go to the chat. I'm going to say, right, I'm Rob Chevez. I'll put in my contact info, CEO of the CAZA Group, powered by Grid, right? And now you guys can add me to your database, right? And by the way, you should be adding me to your database, and I should be adding you to your database, because the power is in the relationships and the people that you have, right? So I'm just going to put Rob Chevez, CEO of CAZA, and Rob at thecazagroup.com. And I am primarily a buy and hold guy. That is where, my wife and I own a bunch of real estate assets. And we believe in building wealth and financial freedom through holding assets. Now, we've done lots of fix and flips, lots of wholesale deals, creative financing, subject twos. But I am at my core a buy and hold person, because I love building passive income through those assets. So that's a little bit about me. Tonight's topic is on wholesaling. And Mark, what I propose is, depending on the size here, why don't the leaders, you and Danielle, share a little bit about your background, and then we'll let everybody else just put in the comments, who they are, what kind of deals they do, what kind of investor they are. If you're new, just say, I'm new, I'm here to learn, but put your contact info in there, right? That way, don't worry, nobody's going to spam you. Nobody's doing any of that stuff. This is all about you building your network of other real estate investors, other people that are interested in building wealth through real estate. Super important. The power is in the network, right?
Yep. And if we do it that way, we might actually be able to keep this thing to a tight hour for once. I know you said we're going to keep this to an hour, respect everybody's time, get you this information, get you out there doing some deals, and then hopefully, like Rob, you said, following up. So follow up with me. I'm Mark Beckett, Mark at thecazagroup.com. I will put that in the chat where you can find me. As Rob said, everybody else put your information in there. Just like we do when this is a live in the room presentation, feel free to stop us, raise your hand, ask a question. We want this to be collaborative. We want this to be a discussion. We are not professional gurus. There is nothing to pitch here for you to buy at the end of the night. Buy me a drink or buy me a lunch, or even better, take us out for coffee, right? So we'll talk about our discussion for tonight, talk about our topic, how we approach this topic. And I'm sure there will be other things you want to know, other kind of gaps you want to fill in. That's where the networking happens, right? Take us out to lunch. That's where we get our deals from. It's where we get our lead flow. So I'm looking to connect, and I'm looking for deals. Love rehab deals, buy and holds. We've got some rental property. We've got a rehab project going on now in Vienna that we're working on a renovation for. So always looking for new projects. If you've got deals to sell or wholesale, like we're going to talk about tonight, I'm always buying. And I also run CAZA Construction. We are a full service Class A construction company that does renovations for agents and their clients to get properties ready for the market. And occasionally some third party kind of typical kitchen and bath home renovation kind of thing. So hit me up if you ever are interested in any of that, or if you know anyone who's a great contractor. We're also always looking for good contractors. So hit me up if you know any of those. That's my bit.
Mark, one of the things I was just thinking about, at some point you guys are in the middle of that renovation, right? If anybody ever just wants to go down and be a fly on the wall and check out the reno, I don't know if you'd ever be open to having somebody bring you a cup of coffee there, and you could certainly talk to them, right?
Yeah, we can try to figure that out. And we've got an ongoing property going where, if you got questions about stuff, that's a good place to see it. And Rob, I know you do a little bit of mentoring and coaching. That may be kind of part of it. We can talk about those things later, or offline, or with people in other places. I don't know. You have questions like that, bring it up. That's kind of what we're here for.
Awesome.
So that's me. And then Danielle, you still around? Jump in.
I am, in fact.
Who are you?
I am Danielle Plesky Brown. I am an investor agent with the CAZA Group. So I work directly with Rob and Mark all the time. I specialize in working with investors of any kind. So if you're looking to buy and hold, if you are looking for flips, developments, that's kind of my wheelhouse, and that's what I love to do. So I help advise through that. I'm looking for more clients who are looking to purchase more properties and also looking to sell any developments, or looking for better agents to help them get things sold better and faster. So if you have any questions, let me know. I've also wholesaled and I'm an investor myself. I like to invest in other people's projects a lot. I don't often do my own flips. So if you're looking for venture money or advice, or even recommendations on other people that might be looking into investing in projects like the ones you're working on, I have a lot of connections like that. So please reach out and I'd love to help.
Awesome.
Ooh.
All right, Rob, I'm just entering my deets into the chat.
Oh, I love it. Everybody's in the chat.
Everybody, chat is
Yeah.
hot. The chat
Already
is
a good
red hot.
energy tonight. I feel good about this.
Yeah, yeah. And so what you want to do too is you have questions, put it in the chat. So as we're commenting, you can certainly, if you're brave enough, right, unmute yourself and ask the question in the chat. I would even encourage you guys all to, if you want to, go to video so that people can, especially when this presentation piece is over, or not even present, I hate the word presentation, this facilitation of a discussion, right? And then that way you guys can kind of put a name, face the voice when you ask a question. So.
Yep. Feel free to put them in the chat too, and we'll try to keep up with anything that shows up on the chat. But the best way to do it is just unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and start screaming, and we'll pick you up. All right. So got some buy and holds. We got some people just picking up first-time investments. Got some people doing a lot of deals. That's awesome. That's cool. Making sure I didn't miss anything. Let's see. Oh, we have a senior at Rutgers. Man, if I'd been paying attention to 10% of what I know now when I was a senior in college, I'd be retired already. So
That's awesome.
You're doing it right. Yep, Laura asked for contact info for the CAZA team. So you're going to see everybody in here. Rob, Mark, and Danielle are all the CAZA people. We're really hard to get a hold of. Rob at thecazagroup.com, Mark at thecazagroup.com, Danielle at thecazagroup.com. Find us wherever your real estate is sold.
So let me interject real fast, Mark, and then I'll let you guys kind of take the floor on this. 13 years ago, I it's a while ago, I essentially realized that I wanted to get into relationship with more investors in the area. And I realized that my wife and I have been buying, real estate up until that point for a good 10 years, somewhere around there, as full-time and part-time investors, right? First part-time, then full-time investors. And we were buying a lot of assets, renovating a lot of houses, buying a lot of rentals. And I realized that a lot of the training, a lot of the groups that were out there, I felt like there was just enough information to make you dangerous, but nobody connected the dots. And so I sat down one evening and I asked myself the question, what would I need to know if I wanted to understand the full life cycle of what a real estate investor's life would look like? And I sat down and I wrote out the topics, the curriculum that you guys see in the grid group today, right? And the reason why we teach these is because they're so foundational. And, January, we always talk about wholesaling because wholesaling is such a foundational piece of this business. You need to understand how it works, right? It's a way that you could do this business without any of your own money, little to no risk. It's a business that you can scale. It is a sales and marketing business. You guys will learn about that, but it is such a great place to learn and grow and scale a business. And many times I see investors do this life cycle of, they start off as a wholesaler, they become a rehabber, they do some rentals, but then they circle back to wholesaling more full-time than renovating, because it is an easier business to scale because you don't have a lot of moving parts like you do in the construction business, where you've got 20 renovations, you got all these different crews managing all the renovations. There's a lot of inefficiency in that. You got to be a great project manager or a great operator to run that many projects at one time, right? we've got Jad in here that runs a lot of projects like that, right? And I admire him for it because there's a level of complexity in running lots of projects like that. But wholesaling, you don't have to, right? You make your money on the purchase. So that's why we like talking about it. And with that, I will shut up.
All right. So you were alluding a little bit to some of the other topics that we cover. And one of the things that you're going to need to know before you can wholesale your deal is how to get one. So show up next month, right? Next month, we start talking about marketing and identifying and negotiating with motivated sellers. And we'll talk about estimating renovations and what kind of materials do we use and how do we do it? How long does it take? How do you manage a contractor? We'll get to all of those things. But as Rob said, we start with wholesaling because when you understand how this works, you can take all of those other things, distill them to the real value, which is your contract rights to a good deal, and monetize it. So that's why we think this is a foundational piece of information to know. And then just before we start real quick, Olga had a question. Rob, where do you think the market is going? Rob, you sold 400 houses last year. Where do you think the market is going for this year?
I mean, the beginning of this year is so super active, right? I'm watching it. I'm vigilant, but inventory is still low. Interests are still low. Interest rates are still low. Buyer demand is still high. We listed a property right at the beginning of the year in Manassas. It had 16 contracts. So at some point, guys, that does have to end. And so what I would do is if I'm a rehabber or if I'm a developer, I am being cognizant of how long that project is and where I am in the life cycle of this market. When you start hearing from people saying, wow, it feels like a top, you're probably close to a top. And I'm hearing a lot of that. Now, truth be told, here's what's crazy, guys, is that 5 years ago, I had that conversation with a private lender who does a lot of business and a lot of renovations as well. And we felt 5 years ago that we were at a market top. Yeah. And so now we were wrong. So what that will tell you is that I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know, right? But what I do know is that I'm just always vigilant. And so what I pay attention to is if inventory levels start rising, then I'm starting to pay more attention. Right now, inventory levels are very low and continue to be low. And as long as inventory levels are low, and I could see where we are in kind of inventory levels, we're gonna be fine. Like we're gonna be good.
I think that's the perfect advice, Rob, because this is a business like many other businesses that is driven by supply and demand. Everything is supply and demand. So I think that supply demand math is what we really are going to hang our hats on. And as long as inventory is low, that's a good thing. As you start to see it creep up, that's when we know to start watching out, right?
Yep.
All right. The other thing you need to watch out for is everything else in the room. Our legal disclosure is just watch yourself, right? We're not here to be attorneys or to be accountants. Do your own due diligence, do your own homework, look up anybody that you're talking to in the room, vet every person, vet every deal, and take care of yourselves. So with that, the topic tonight is wholesaling. And what do we mean when we say wholesaling? Everybody says I'm a wholesaler. What are these people doing? Wholesaling is simply the process of finding a good deal. And we'll talk more about that in subsequent months, but you find a good deal, you put it under contract, and you sell the rights that you have in your contract to the purchase of that property. You sell those rights to another investor. So wholesaling is what we call it because you technically don't take actual ownership and delivery of the product, being the house. You have the right to, but you don't actually go through with a purchase where you would then have to resell with all of the other closing costs and marketing costs and potential for agents and all the commissions and other things that you would do if you bought and resold a house, which is what we do when we rehab, right? When we rehab, we find these motivated sellers, we find these beat up houses, we make the best offer we can to try to get them to accept. When we find someone willing to sell, we buy the house, we renovate it, we have to try to figure out how we're going to fix it up, what are the right finishes, how are we going to price it, all the other things Rob was talking about, all of the risk, all the time, all the hassle of doing that, and then you have to sell it. Wholesaling eliminates 99% of that. You find the deal, you very importantly put it under contract, and then you sell those contract rights to another investor. That makes sense as a concept? Anyone have questions about what the concept is that we're talking about here? In law, and again, not a lawyer, the contract gives you rights. Those rights are a thing, and that is a thing that you can sell. So that is what we're selling. We are selling our rights, and it's an important distinction to make because there are people who would say, well, if you're just advertising a house that you have for sale, you just say, hey, 123 Main Street, I'm looking to sell it for $500,000. You should be either the owner of that house or an agent with a valid legal listing agreement giving you the right to sell it for somebody else if you don't own it. Wholesaling is selling rights to a thing that you don't own, but that's the important distinction. We are selling the rights. We are not selling the thing. So when you market your deal, when you market your thing to sell, you are saying, I'm a wholesaler. I'm looking to assign my rights. So we'll get in more in a second to how the assignment bit works. But it is important to kind of make that distinction between this is a house that I'm selling versus this is a contract that I'm selling the rights to that I will assign to someone for a fee. So that's the concept. And a little bit about how it actually works then. And I don't know, Danielle, do you want to talk a little bit about how the actual wholesaling process works?
Sure. So from a tactical standpoint, what you do first is, and we'll go deeper into this in subsequent months, like Mark had said, you find a motivated seller who's interested in selling a property that's distressed of some kind. So either physically or financially or both. Then the process from there is you would get that property under contract, meaning that you're going to have an agreement with the seller directly, the owner of the property, all owners of the property, actually, to be very clear on that, because you may want to make sure you are dealing with the person or persons that can sell the property. You want to have a written agreement. Now, there's lots of examples of this. They can be as short as a page. They can be longer and lengthier. It completely depends. I don't know if we share examples or if we have an example that we could share in the future, but the one I usually use is like a one-page agreement. Then once you have that agreement with the seller, it has to have three things. One of which is the date the agreement takes place. It has to have their signature. It has to have an agreed upon purchase price and a date that your agreement expires. So it has to have those four things really. Now, once you have that, you have then the right to find an end buyer, meaning that you can find someone who you'd like to then either assign or sell your contract to. Once you find that end buyer, you would negotiate a price with them that is higher than what you are guaranteeing that you're going to be selling the property for the seller for, or paying the seller for, essentially. That is how you create your fee. So say in an example, you agree to purchase the property from the seller for $500,000. And then you find another buyer who you're going to sell your contract to that wants to pay you $550,000. In that example, you could make a $50,000 wholesaling fee. Am I forgetting any details, Mark?
Yep.
Actually, I want to jump in. This is the perfect opportunity to tell a story, right?
Okay, great.
I would say there was a person in our network, Joe, awesome guy. I was giving him a hard time for not bringing us any deals, right? And I said, Joe, bring us a deal. So he brought us a deal, and Mark will remember all the details of the deal. All I remembered was that his next door neighbor needed to sell his house. His next door neighbor was motivated, right? He signed an agreement with that neighbor, and then what he did was purchase contract with that neighbor, and then he made us sign an assignment document, which essentially gives us the right to purchase that contract from him, and we paid him $100,000, right? So he made $100,000 by signing over one piece of paper and gave us the rights to purchase his purchase contract, right? That's what wholesaling is. And by the way, that came from this network because we said we were looking for a deal. I gave him a hard time. He said, okay, Rob, hey, I got one for you. Now we did the reno on the back end, and we made almost equivalent dollars. He made, I remember he made a little bit more. So we went through all the work of doing the bathrooms and the kitchens, and it took us, I don't know, 5 months, to do the whole reno, right, Mark? But that is a great relationship. Why the relationship between the wholesaler and the rehabber is like we need each other, right? And he made $100,000 selling us the paper, right? Which is what makes it so great, right? Joe, Mark, do you remember the exact numbers of that deal?
I remember the 100,000 because it was an even $100,000 check, and the way that we did that one because we knew the seller, our wholesaler. He trusted us. Like, yeah, just buy it, and after you get it funded, whatever you're doing, getting your loan, getting your money together, write me my check. And I had to write him a check for $100,000. And then, I think we made like 66,000, something like that. So a little less than he did for just putting it under contract and making his money in about 2 weeks. But that's fine. 65 grand is still not a bad day at the office. Happy to do it. Would do it again. I'd do it 10 times over. I do not care what my wholesaler makes for their fee. All I care about is what I want. I want a deal. I know what I'm willing to pay. If you will sell it to me for what I'm willing to pay and you make $1 million over top of that, go ahead. And we know people who, I don't know about 1 million, but I think the most we've ever heard of was 300, 350, I think, in DC. We know some guys that were doing deals in DC that were getting multifamily, what could be multifamily properties under contract. And one time wholesaled one of them for $350,000 more than he had it under contract for. So the sky is the limit, whatever the market will pay. But the way it works is you find a seller who will sell a property to you for less than someone else will pay, and you make the difference. That difference between what you've got it under contract for and what the open market will pay for it is what ultimately becomes your fee.
So we got a great question here on that segue, right? Do we have to disclose to the homeowner that we will sell the contract, right? Someone else is going to closing.
Yeah. So I think a few of these things come up, but we can kind of talk about them as they come up because there was a question before that asked about the contract and is it a different contract for wholesaling than just if you're going to buy the house for yourself? And the answer is not really. It can be the regular realtor contract that you use. It can be, as Danielle said, a one-pager that covers a few things, and the things that it covers will vary by state, by the way. The 4 things that we have to have on a piece of paper around here to buy a house may be different than yours. But there are ways that you can get access to contracts that are usable in your state. The most important thing about that contract, though, is that it is clear that it gives you the right to assign your rights, your contract rights, to someone else. In this area, for instance, the realtor contract is very clear that it does not give you, as the contract buyer, the right to assign your rights to someone else without the seller's prior written consent. We specifically want the right not to have to go back to the buyer and say, hey, is it okay if I assign my rights to someone else? Which then gets back to that disclosure question of, well, how do you deal with it? And the short answer is, with a truly motivated seller, and that's probably what you're dealing with, it really isn't much of an issue. We explain to people, here's the offer. We can close, in X number of weeks. Remember, we're going to buy it absolutely as is. If you want to take things out of the house, that's great. If you need help taking things out of the house, we will help you. But most importantly, you can just close that door behind you. And when you hear click, you're done. That's what motivates a motivated seller. I'll take it as it sits. As you might imagine, it takes a village to get these things done. It might not even be, me at the closing. And by the way, COVID is one of the greatest things that ever happened to this end of doing real estate deals, because no one's at the same table for closing anymore. You don't shake and hug or do anything at a closing table when you buy a house. The closing company goes to wherever the seller is, gets their paperwork signed, goes to wherever the buyer is, gets their paperwork signed, and they would never see each other again. So I tell people we might not see each other after today when we're here signing this contract. Just know that you're going to see things happening.
One of my partners.
You're going to get contacted by one of my partners at the title company they're going to start collecting information from you, and on or before the date that we said, we're going to go to closing, your house is going to sell. That's it. That's the end of the discussion. You need to ask for that permission if you're using the standard realtor contract that says this cannot be assigned. But if you use the correct, what I would consider the correct form of contract that says, here's the buyer's name and or assigns written into the contract, and then it specifically has another line somewhere that says buyer has the right to assign their rights to someone else. If it comes up, you say, yeah, it takes a village to get these things done. I have partners. Sometimes we change the name of the entity to whatever holding company we're going to use to buy this. We need to be able to put this deal into that holding company. You will probably see that happen before sale. Doesn't matter. All the money is green. Sale is going to happen. And that's all the discussion that there is about it. If you've got someone that's truly that concerned about how something's going to work, they're probably not motivated, would be my answer. It's just, I've never had it be an issue. Rob, have you? Would anyone say, I need to know exactly who the people are, the members of this LLC that you're putting on the paper? It doesn't come up.
No. And as long as you disclose that there's other parties that are involved, right? Then it's a non-issue. But we have, when it's been a really big assignment fee, we have worked out agreements where third parties are holding the money, and one settlement happens that gets, sent to us. But I think,
we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll get to that bit about how you get paid.
Okay.
So just talk fundamentally, though. Again, the scenario that I want you to think about here is we have found our deal. We have found our motivated seller. They're willing to sell me a house. In the case of the example that I used, that I know is going to be worth $100,000 after I fix it up, they were willing to sell it to me for $50,000. If I can find someone else that would want to buy that house for $55,000, there's a $5,000 fee in there that I should be able to extract. And what I do is I find my end buyer investor and I say, if you would like to buy this property and you would pay $55,000 for it, I will assign my rights to you. And if you choose to tell them at the time what your fee is, you can. We generally don't when we're approaching sellers. And again, I don't ask when someone is approaching me to be a buyer. I just say, what information can you get me about the house? How much are you asking? And then I look at it and I can tell you if I like your price, or if you want me to just give you a price, I tell you what my price is. And if that's higher than what you've got it under contract for, you're making money. But the process is put it under contract for more than, put a house under contract at whatever price you can get, find your end buyer, agree to assign it to them for the difference between whatever they're willing to pay for it and what you've got it under contract for. And then it's just a matter of collecting that fee.
Yep.
So they would then purchase the property under your terms, and then you would get paid at that closing.
And I know you're going to cover this, Mark, but I want to reiterate what makes this such a great foundation tool for everybody to learn and implement is that you really learn your numbers, right? You learn what something's worth, right? You understand what something, the ARV is, the after repair value. You need to know what that, there we go, right? Learn what something is worth. Then you got to start understanding what something is going to cost you to fix it up, to get it to that number. And then any number below, and by the way, any number below that number is going to be what you can get in terms of the fee. So you got to really learn the numbers, and learning the numbers is what makes you a great investor. So that's why I love this piece. And you get to learn the numbers and not really put any money at risk in the process.
Right. So Rob, that math you're talking about for ARV, or after repair value, just a real general formula that you can use. I still buy property at these prices, is 0.7, your after repair value. So what the house is going to be worth fixed up, nice on the market, sold for full retail value. That amount times 0.7 minus the cost of renovation is what I would pay for the house. So back to my example before, if you've got a house that's going to be worth $100,000 fixed up, that times 0.7 is $70,000. And let's say the house just needs paint and carpet, $10,000. So 70,000 minus 10 is 60. I would buy that house for $60,000, put 10 grand into it, be into it for 70, sell it for 100, closing costs, commissions, all of that stuff. You don't make a lot of money that way. but you'd make a couple bucks there, and it works for larger numbers too, obviously. So if I'm willing to pay 60, all you got to do is get it for 59 or less. 59 or less, and you're making money, and I would pay you that difference.
Hey, what I want to see in here right now in the chat, like who's wholesaled something in the last like 5 months, right? If you have, comment, right? Just go in the chat and be like, hey, I've wholesaled, right? Something in the last 5 months, or I almost wholesaled a deal. The biggest challenge right now with wholesaling, on the investment side, is finding a deal, right? Like this is finding a deal, which we talk about next month. How do you get the telephone to ring, find a deal, negotiate that deal? But I'd love for you to comment on there.
Philip actually asked a really good question. Any specific tools or methods that you use to determine after repair value? Obviously, that is crucial that you understand value where you're looking to invest, not just where you want to be, but where another investor might want to be, right? What are they going to consider to be after repair value? So the main tool is the multiple listing service. We talk about this all the time. You must have access to the MLS to be good at this business, be it rehabbing, wholesaling, even a landlord. You still have to know what the property is worth, what it rents for, what it will sell for if it's sold. And to get the best data, you have to have access to the multiple listing service. Yes, you can see what houses sold for on Zillow or Realtor or other online sources, but that information is delayed. It doesn't have a resource where you can look at comps against one another in a neighborhood quickly and easily, where you can kind of understand things like past ownership, easily understand the square footage of the house, have easy access to the tax record for the property. The only current best place to get that is usually whatever the equivalent of the agent's access multiple listing services in your area. Around here, it's called Bright MLS for the DC metro area. If you are not an agent, you can still get access to that through various means and relationships that you might have with other agents. You could work with an agent. You could work for an agent. Working for an agent doesn't mean you work full-time for them, but enough that you'd be able to get assistant level access to the multiple listing service. You can just make an arrangement. You can partner with an agent. However you do it, you need to have that access to the true, best, most reliable, up-to-date information, and that comes from the multiple listing service. And that's where we get all of our information about comp properties and what's active right now versus under contract, and how long did it take to go under contract versus what's sold, and how many sold yesterday, not 3 months ago. We need to know what is happening in the market right now. So that access is critical. So that is the tool, is the multiple listing service. That, and then time spent in that, looking at your market, learning how to determine value. And we talk about that a little bit more, I think, further into the year as we talk about how to estimate renovation and how to actually run through the process of an entire deal. And we'll talk about that in some greater detail. It takes some time, and it takes some practice learning how to determine a correct after repair value. So another question. Since Rob, you're saying attorneys are a great source for leads, ask an attorney, is this legal? Danielle, aren't you an attorney? I don't want
No,
to put you on the spot. Okay.
I'm not an attorney,
All
not,
right.
not at all. But
All right.
I have never been told this is not legal. How about that?
Well, it's absolutely, I can tell you, it is
Absolutely
legal.
legal.
Without being an attorney, I can tell you it's legal. Because again, what you are selling is what's called an equitable interest. When you put a property under contract, you gain what is called equitable interest in that property, and what you are selling is that interest. So as long as you're clear that you are assigning rights to a property that you have under contract, the thing that you are doing is legal. It may need different language in your particular state. That's why Rob mentions attorneys are not just great sources for leads, but they're also great sources for paperwork, as are title companies. Champion Title, right? Washington Metro, our personal friends here in this area, have attorneys on staff that might be able to direct you to some paperwork that you'd be able to use for both purchasing and assigning your contract. but it is absolutely legal. What might get you into some trouble, though, as I said before, is if you are advertising the property as if you were an agent. I'm pretty sure it's probably not a good idea to take your wholesale property and put it on the MLS as a listing if you are not the agent. Pretty sure you can't do that. So be very aware of what you can't do. But what you can do is assign your rights. So make sure that your contract is assignable, that it has in there your name, your LLC, whatever it is as the buyer and or assigns, and that it also says that you can assign it to another party. Is that a question? Or is that an open mic? I'm thinking I'm going with open mic. Let's check real quick. Aren't they changing the laws in Virginia for where you need to put down $500? I'm guessing that's $500 for them to know you're legit in selling or assigning the contract. I have not heard anything like that. So I would be curious if anyone's got any kind of link or information to actual.
Somebody asked a question earlier, and listen, I put down $100 as an EMD to wholesale a deal, as much as $10,000, right? Once you feel very confident in the numbers, hey, I'll stroke a $10,000 EMD because I feel comfortable that I'm going to buy that property one way or another. I'm going to wholesale it, or I'm going to buy it, right? So you could write $100, which is what I did in the beginning because I was nervous and scared, right? But after a while, it doesn't matter, right?
Yep. And so that kind of gets into Monica's question about if something goes wrong, do you still own the property? Do you have to go through with the property? To which Philip replied correctly that you can have a clause where if you can't find a buyer for any reason whatsoever, you just don't want to close on the property, you can cancel it, and or your contract can be written such that if you default and don't show up, what you lose is the deposit. And that's, Rob, what we're talking about is what deposit are you willing to lose if this doesn't work and your deal doesn't go through. In actuality, we rarely have to walk from contracts, mostly because we make sure that it's something, if we're going to wholesale it, I'd be willing to buy it myself, but make sure that you have a contract that gives you rights to terminate if you need them, or reasonable deposits that you can walk from if something goes horribly wrong, you can't perform, and now that's what the deposit is for. It is the earnest money that the seller gets to keep if you don't close.
Chad said he lost $5K last week in his EMD. Somebody had asked, what's an EMD, earnest money deposit? It's your good faith money saying that you are going to follow through with this transaction. Now you are going to give yourself some outs along the way. And in which point, if you exercise those outs, you get your EMD back, your earnest money deposit back. But if you default on what you said you were going to do, then one of the remedies of that is they get to keep your earnest money deposit. And quite honestly, they could even sue you for damages if they wanted to. Most people don't because it's not worth the cost, right? But that's what earnest money deposit is, kind of like your good faith money saying you're going to do what you say you're going to do. Right. Personally, Mark, I never put a property under contract that I wasn't prepared to buy. I know that there's lots of investors out there that will put something under contract to test to see if they can sell and make the delta. But I hated the feeling of not going through with my word. That's how I was. I was like, if I put something under contract, then I'm going to fulfill on this because these people are now relying on me. I built a personal relationship. That's me personally. I know lots of people that are not like that, right?
Well,
it's not, it's just the nature of the business. But
you would have to have the ability to close even if you wanted to. Just because you feel personally obligated to do it doesn't mean you can actually do it. So you'd either have to have the cash, partner's loan, whatever it was, to actually perform. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to perform under the contract. You would default under the contract, and the seller would get to keep, technically, legally, whatever deposit you had put up as your earnest money deposit.
Yeah, and the truth is, though, guys, if it is a good deal, it is so easy to get that deal to the settlement table. Like there's so much money out there. Even in a bad market, if it was a good deal, it's only the only way you're not going to be able to close on a property like that is if you put yourself into a bad deal, at which point, okay, it's a bad deal, right?
Right.
That's where you need to get yourself.
If you've got a bad deal, and in the worst case scenario, you walk from a deposit, that is the best outcome, rather than buying a bad deal. But as to how much that deposit needs to be, to my understanding, currently, it just has to be money. $1, $100, $500, $10,000, whatever it is the seller will accept as an earnest money deposit. If that is changing, that would be news to me, that there would be a minimum deposit required by law. I'm not aware of it, but always happy to learn. So if anybody hears that there's a new legal minimum, and again, that's in this area here, could be different in other parts of the country or world. You may have a minimum deposit, but then this gets back to an attorney being a really good resource. So let's all exchange those resources for good real estate attorneys that we have that can help us draft contracts that allow us to get out of them if we need to, minimize our deposit and make it a clean break if you need to walk from a deposit, and make sure that all you lose is that deposit, and making it clear. But again, most of these issues are resolved by dealing with a truly motivated seller. If you're having to really get into the dollars and cents of your deposit, I would argue you probably are not talking to a motivated seller. If they're wanting to, make sure that it's going to be you that shows up at the table, you're probably not talking to a motivated seller. Step one, find a motivated seller.
I want to answer these two questions, and then I'm out. I'm not gonna talk anymore. I'll let you guys. But Paris asked if you were starting a wholesale business from scratch, right? I think this is a good question. Yep. How much time, money should you be ready to risk, right? And then on the flip side of that, so if I'm in the military, this is Jeremiah asking, would I be able to do this overseas or while I'm on deployment? So those are two interesting questions because there's two ways to answer that, right? So I'll say, Paris, it depends on your risk tolerance, right? And how much money you're willing to invest in order to get that deal done, to find the deal. The truth is you could do this without spending any money. So and we will talk about that next week in more detail, meaning if you saw a house and needed some work from the outside, you could literally knock on that door, just ask somebody, hey, if you're ever thinking about selling, I'm interested in buying, here's my business card. And you do that enough with enough people. So that is the time aspect of it, right? You determine how much your dreams are worth, how much time you're willing to devote to your dreams, right? When I first started in this business, I worked a solid 50 hours in my other business and then another like 40 hours getting this business started, right? I was willing to invest my time for my dreams. So, but you don't have to spend actual dollars, right? In the beginning, you could literally just go and knock on these doors that look like they need some work and say, if you're interested in selling, I'm interested in buying, right? Now, for the person, Jeremiah, that is overseas saying, can I do this from overseas? The answer is absolutely 100%. And you're going to do it one or two ways. You can do it either through calling, right? Through a dialer system. And it is going to cost you some money to call from overseas and get a list and do that stuff, but it's not expensive. And direct mail, right, to a targeted list of absentee owners. And so those are the two juxtapositions, kind of like prospecting based versus marketing based, right? One is prospecting, going and knocking on those doors and belly to belly. The other is marketing from afar. That will be more dollars spent doing that. So both you can absolutely do. You just have to determine what your budget is going to be. And then in my opinion, direct mail, you said, and you're like, I'm going to spend this money. I'm prepared to spend at least a year of direct mail money to get myself a deal. And that might sound ludicrous to a lot of people, but direct mail happens on the 9th, 10th, 11th type of touch. And so you don't go for a big list, you go for a small targeted list, right? We call it zoning a market. You go small to go big, right? You got to make your list small and hit them over and over and over and over again, as opposed to hitting a big list one time, right? And that's the number one mistake I see investors make. They think that spending dollars equals making more money. It's not what happens. So they spend a lot of money all at once on one or two mailings, and then they run out of money and they're like, this doesn't work. And it's like, no, you just did it wrong. Nobody guided you. Nobody showed you. So just don't make those mistakes. But definitely possible to do from overseas. There's lots of people, possibly even on this call, that wholesale out of state. It's very common to do these days, right? So
yeah.
And yeah, all you're doing.
You are out of state or out of the country or overseas or anywhere. It can be really great to actually partner with, say, like a local agent or someone else who can be some of your boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And also connect you with end buyers and other investors, people that are interested in your possible deal. So much of wholesaling is really creating a deal finding machine. And once you do that, if you partner with the right people, you'll always be able to sell your deal. So you could either do that. There's so many avenues to do that, but with the right network and the right partnerships, you could be tremendously successful, really just finding those motivated sellers and then working with someone else to get the deal to the close. So that's most of what my experience working with wholesalers has been, at least for me.
Yep.
Well,
They're the
I mean,
best partners and ISAs I got.
So Tony was asking the best way to wholesale in states that do not allow it, selling the LLC. First of all, I'm not aware of any state that doesn't allow you to assign contract rights. It happens all the time, everywhere. The vast majority of commercial real estate involves at some point some assignment of contract. Most of the time, the LLC doesn't exist yet that is used to take possession of the property. It has to be formed, and then the contract is signed into that new entity. So the short answer is, someone find me a state that says you legally cannot assign your contract rights, and then we can discuss alternatives. But the alternative of selling an LLC is possible, but I would argue that that has more potential pitfalls than just assignment. If you form an LLC, that is also an entity, a thing that has value that you can sell. If that LLC has a contract on a house, you're technically selling that contract along with the LLC, but selling your LLC in some states triggers tax treatment, where they consider the value of real estate owned as part of the taxable event of selling the LLC, and you can be charged income tax on the sale of the LLC, which you do not on a wholesale. You make money, and of course you have to pay taxes on the money that you make, but it doesn't go to a traditional closing on the transfer. It's done with a piece of paper. I assign my rights. When that contract closes, I'm paid my fee. I pay my taxes later on the money that I made. So selling the LLC is not always a better way to wholesale than just assigning your rights.
Well, it is a good way, like if you don't want somebody to know what the assignment fee is, right? You just sell the LLC.
Yep.
And I'm curious if anybody's done it on here, right?
Just know that that is a transaction, a sale of an entity, of an asset, of a thing, being that LLC, and there could be some other work to do if you try to do that. And then Diane was saying that had to walk from some contracts that had deposits, and that the lawyer kept the earnest money deposit, and although it was stated in the contract to return to me, I don't know what to tell you without looking at contracts, but the contract should be clear with what happens with that earnest money, what constitutes default, and what happens if the buyer defaults, what happens if the seller defaults, and when and how and to whom that deposit should go. So all of those things ought to be covered in a contract and should be.
And by the way, if a buyer and seller agree to something, I don't know why the attorney would get involved in that. Now, I'm not an attorney, but I would be like, wait a second, seller agrees. We agreed to exchange back the money. Like, why are you keeping my money? That's crazy, right?
Right. Yep.
Buyer and seller have agreed, right? Unless he constitutes as his mediation fee. I don't know if that was a mediation fee, but to me that's a little crazy.
Yeah, don't know. Someone was asking, where do you find a list of absentee owners or potential sellers? Public records. Most jurisdictions have public records where if you do not live in a piece of real estate that you own, you have to at least acknowledge that you don't, and potentially even give them contact information of where you can be reached. If that's a public record that you can get your hands on, then you can mail to that person who is the owner of a property they don't live in.
You can buy a list too.
And then, of course, you can always buy those lists as well. Yep, just Google search how to buy absentee owner lists. So let's see.
Also, Remine is a great tool. So for any of you that do have access to MLS, Remine is a tremendous tool that you can pull lists completely for free. It's included with your MLS subscription and under a whole lot of different categories. Now, it won't necessarily have the phone number or email address of of the list of the people. I've had a really good experience with truepeoplesearch.com. For kind of cross-matching that, but it could give you a whole list of addresses of potential sellers.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of my favorite tools for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different tools out there. And you know, you've got RedX that can give you absentee landlords. You can get the phone numbers there. True People Search is great, right? So.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll try to jam through a couple more of these questions so they don't get buried, but we want to keep moving also. Someone's asking who holds the EMD. I can tell you in the state of Virginia, the earnest money deposit is held by the title company or the closing company or the settlement company, whatever you want to call it, that will be processing the sale with the buyer and seller. They get the EMD. They collect information from the seller. They collect information from the buyer. They collect the money from the buyer. They send that money to the seller after they take out all the various costs.
Yeah, don't give it to
they hold
the seller.
Yeah, they send it to the seller rather. And they hold the earnest money deposit. In some states, it's an attorney. In some places, it doesn't have to necessarily be held by anyone. Check your local jurisdiction for who holds the EMD. Can I cancel on the phone or does it have to be written? That will also probably vary by state, but I would suggest that most real estate transactions should happen in writing. Most real estate communication should happen in writing for everyone. I certainly wouldn't want to cancel my contract.
I would even say, I don't even want to use the word most, right? Everything should happen in writing, right?
I think in every state, you must have a written contract. You cannot transact a real estate sale without a written contract. As to how you cancel it, again, everything probably ought to be in writing every time it can be. Certainly anything involving a real estate transaction. Would I be able to close? Would I be able to go to courthouses for pre-foreclosed houses? That's kind of getting into auction and court sales. Maybe we can talk about that offline. But yes, there are still people who buy at auction at the courthouse. It does happen. It's got competition, but then so does everything. Add websites. Not sure what that is.
It was
Remine.
for the references that we just said for pulling lists. So I put a few that we had mentioned.
So typical terms of a wholesaling contract. Tell you what, let's go through a few more of these slides and then we can kind of double back on some of that if it doesn't answer that question. So, this last one here. Do I need a real estate license? Short answer is no. No, you are not acting as a realtor. You are acting as the contract purchaser. You own those rights by having a property under contract. You do not need to be an agent. In fact, you are very much not acting as an agent. You are acting on your own behalf. Me or my LLC is buying this house. I am then selling those rights to someone else and collecting a fee for it. You can do it if you're a realtor. You just have to be a little bit more clear depending on where you're active in making sure that it's in your contract. If you are signing the contract and you are an agent, you probably have to acknowledge that in your contract paperwork and say that I'm an agent.
Required to be disclosed.
It is.
It's
It's
part
a
of any
disclosure.
MLS system. You have to disclose that you're an agent at any time you do real estate or provide advice.
I would guess that's probably the case everywhere, right? I know it is here. You must disclose.
Yes.
All right. So this is an easy one. Where do I find buyers? Is there anyone on the chat tonight that would be interested in a great below market real estate deal?
Me.
Yeah. So first of all, look no further. You got a good deal, call me. But yeah, the finding buyers is incredibly easy. If you've got a good deal, there are plenty of people out there who are looking to buy them.
I think there's 50 people on on this Zoom. You've got
Exactly.
50
So,
buyers right
by the
now.
way, if you've got a deal tonight, you're looking to wholesale, throw it in the chat.
Throw it in the chat.
That's
Right.
that's what we're here for. We're here to make
Yeah,
deals.
if you've got a deal you want to share, throw it in the chat.
Yeah, just go to events like this. If you're here tonight, you already know where to find buyers. A lot of active people out there looking for deals. All right, so this is what we were talking about earlier. Do you have to buy the property if something happens and the buyer that you went to doesn't show up, doesn't do what they said they were going to do? And the answer is not necessarily. It depends a little bit on what your contract says, how much time you have between when your end buyer doesn't show up and when you're supposed to go to closing. But that's why you need a well-written contract that you should vet with an attorney. You need to make sure that you are clear about what that earnest money deposit is that you are willing to lose, and then try to only work on good deals that you know you will find a buyer to perform with, and maybe have more than one buyer in case something happens, somebody flakes out or gets hit by a bus, so that you can find a backup. That's happened before. We've heard of plenty of deals that, the day before, day of, something happens and somebody flakes out and somebody's got to find a backup. And if you've got a good deal, that can still get done. You'd find a way to work it out. Sorry, I can't close. Something's come up, partner's sick, whatever. Give us 48 more hours and we'll still get this done. You can work something out for a good deal. You'll find yourself a backup buyer and you'll be able to save your deal. If it's a bad deal and no one is looking to buy it, then first of all, you should have put it under contract to begin with. But if you did, and you now can't back out, if you had, however many days to back out, you didn't use them, and now all you have is your earnest money deposit, you may need to walk from that deposit. So make sure it's an amount that you can afford to lose.
But here's the deal. You're going to cover that hole because you're going to be asking for a sizable deposit.
And oh, by the way, that's correct. If it's the day before closing, that means you should have identified your end user buyer, and they should be giving you a deposit that you need to make sure that you collect, and that either goes into your pocket, your bank, the settlement company, an attorney you trust. It goes somewhere, but you need to collect a deposit that's at least as much as you offered when you offered to buy the property.
Twice as
preferably much, much more than that, to allow you some extra funds to renegotiate with if it happens the day of. And now maybe you need to say, all right, I'm sorry, this isn't going to happen, but instead of 100, I'll give you 105, but give me 7 more days to close, whatever you need to work out. You should be collecting a sizable deposit on your wholesale, on your assignment. And yes, you can do that. You can say, I'm assigning you my rights to this contract for a total purchase price of $150,000. Of that, you end buyer must put down a $20,000 deposit payable to me, the settlement company, my attorney, whatever you direct. Remember, this is your deal. You get to dictate some of these terms, and a buyer who wants your good deal will agree to these reasonable terms. You need to put your deposit in this name, in this account, in X number of hours from signing this agreement, or the agreement is void. Make sure you collect those deposits. We've always paid a deposit when we have bought as a wholesale buyer. We've always collected one when we have assigned our rights to someone else.
That's just a quick question. So that's a little bit different than the typical real estate transaction where everything is done at the closing table. Whereas a wholesaler going to a buyer, or a buyer going to a wholesaler, the transaction is happening outside of the closing table. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
Sort of. As it relates to this deposit, though, it's exactly like any other real estate transaction. We've offered a deposit, right? That's what we were talking about to our seller. We told our seller, I'm going to give you a $5,000 deposit on this $100,000 purchase, right? And by the way, it's not going to be me at the closing company. I got a partner. Don't worry about that. Everybody's money is great. We laugh about it. We don't hear from them until we get closer to closing. I find another investor. I've got it under contract for 100. He's going to buy it from me for 150. Great. I'm going to assign you my contract rights. When you sign here agreeing to accept my contract rights, you also agree to put a $15,000 deposit with the title company that I tell you to within 24 hours of signing this contract. If you don't, contract's void, you're out, I'll go to somebody else. Once you've posted that $15,000 deposit on this assignment, if you don't show up on whatever date we've decided you're going to show up and close, I am keeping that $15,000. The part that you're talking about where the transaction has taken place is, yes, technically I have fulfilled my obligation as the wholesaler when I've brought this deal to you, Mr. Investor, and you agreed to buy it from me. And you said you would be willing to buy this property for $150,000. Don't worry about what I've got it under contract for, but it's worth $150 to you. Great. Sign here. I'll assign my rights to you. You can buy it. You give me $15,000, and then technically I've done my job. So there are wholesalers out there that say, if you change your mind the next day, I'm keeping your $15,000. And technically you've earned the right to do that. Would I do it if my end buyer, canceled the same day or the next day, and I had more time to find another buyer? I don't know. But technically, yes, you have done your job. You've lived up to your end of the contract. All you're doing is assigning your rights, and it's a contract. It's a 1 page, 2 page, however long your assignment contract is. It's a contract, and you've earned your fee by signing it and by assigning your rights. So does that answer the question?
Yep, I think so. I just, with the way that was talked about, it sounded like me as a buyer, I would give them the wholesaler $5,000 right there up front. But what you're saying is I would put pretty much like an earnest money deposit to the title company, and then
do not give it to the wholesaler directly.
yeah, right. Well, that's what I was clarifying.
Good. Yeah,
Yep.
you don't want to give it. So because a couple, let me give you let me tell you a story, right?
Yeah.
So I gave a investor money up front, didn't put it to the title company. This was 15 years ago, right? It wasn't a lot of money. It was like $1,000, but it's $1,000, right?
Yep.
What happened was she assigned me the rights to her contract. Awesome. Great. I'm super pumped, right? Good to go to settlement. And then what happened was there was all these additional liens on the property. It was cross collateralized, and the settlement attorney's like, I can't release this one property to sell it to you because it's cross collateralized against all of them, right? So guess what? So I go back to the wholesaler and I'm like, hey, you can't, you're not performing, right? I need my money back. And to get that back, and I never got it back. And I didn't even bother to go after, right? I was like, the time it's going to take me to go after. So you learn your lesson. A couple things, like you want to make sure that when you're a wholesaler and you're wholesaling, you want to know what are the other additional liens that are against these assets, right? That makes you a professional at that point. You put it under contract. You've done your due diligence on it. You've got like a title putting down. You know any additional liens that are there. And yeah, you don't give your money directly to anybody, right? It goes to a third-party company. It goes to the title company. So,
yeah, that is always safer. Have the title companies or a title attorney or someone in the middle holding all of these funds. But technically, as long as it is a valid contract that can be closed, your wholesaler's done their job and earned their fee.
cool.
But I agree, probably not a great idea to give it to them up front before you've made sure that you can close on the house.
No.
All right, so that's the deposit that you are going to collect from your end buyer. So how do you get paid? Couple of different ways. The easiest and perhaps most common is I've got this house under contract for $100,000. And I've found an end user investor who is willing to pay $150 for it. It's $50,000 in it for me. So when we go to closing, the title company has collected whatever deposit I got from my buyer. They've collected whatever deposit I put in there for the seller. They do all the math on all that. They put it on the HUD or closing statement or settlement statement or whatever it is your title company is calling it. And it says, seller, you agreed to sell the house for $100,000. Here's your $100,000 minus some taxes, commissions, whatever else you were paying seller. Here's your $100,000. Buyer, you are bringing $150,000 to the table to buy this property, plus whatever your typical closing costs are. And then over here in the bottom corner, my entity LLC assignment fee, $50,000. And that money is collected at the closing by the title company from the buyer who brought 150. They give 50 of it to me after all of the funds clear, depending on what the financing is, if there's a loan, how long it takes in your state, couple of days to sometimes same day. Gives me my 50, give the seller their 100. And that may be the point where sometimes you would say, but what if a seller says they see on here assignment fee to blah, 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 they're going to be mad. Again, never come up. It's closing day. Not once ever had a deal not close. But if you were looking to go way out of your way to not have that happen, you can separate the transactions with your title company or an attorney, possibly, and say, all right, this is a separate transaction. The assignment is one transaction. I've assigned my rights to Joe Smith, LLC. He is going to close on the property for me, but he's agreed to a $50,000 fee in exchange for me lining up this deal for him. That goes into a separate escrow. And then step one, he closes on the house. Step two, once that happens, this escrow is released to me as the wholesaler and kept as a separate transaction. You need to make sure that your title or settlement company is comfortable being the escrow agent for that kind of transaction. A lot of them will say, well, all we do is hold money for real estate. This is a just separate deal that you have that isn't actually a deal for the real estate. I can tell you there are title companies that do it. There are title companies that don't. But the way we typically do it is it's actually on the HUD because we don't make that big of a deal out of it with the seller. It takes a village. We brought in money. I've sold. I think a couple of times it had come up and I said, I've sold an interest in this deal. This is me collecting some money for selling this deal to another partner to get the funds to get it done. And that's all you have to say. And that settles it. So you get paid at closing when your end buyer shows up with their money and closes on the purchase. Title company sends you a wire or writes you a check, usually within a day or two of closing once all the funds have settled. Let's see what else have I got, and we can get back to this quick.
Mark, we had a couple of questions specifically about some terms or things to put in your contract. Not just things that protect you, but other questions. So specifically, time frame. What's the average time frame a wholesale deal could close?
Yeah.
At least anything that I've ever worked on that has a wholesaler, it can be very similar to a standard transaction. It depends on how quickly you can find an end buyer. And also what time you want to give yourself to find an end buyer if you want to, in fact, wholesale the deal and it's not something you intend on purchasing. So sometimes if you have a great network like this, and if you have an end buyer already in mind, that could be as quick as, say, a couple of weeks if that buyer has cash or if they already have hard money lined up and they can purchase quickly. Like basically as soon as a title company can close. That would be considered very quick, for the record. A lot of times I see 30-day closes. I've seen as many as 60-day closes. And sometimes the specific term that I've used a lot when I represent investors looking for to purchase development properties or things like that, that also can be used in wholesaling, is called something like a feasibility study. So you can write that term in. What that does is it gives you the amount of time you could either find an end buyer or you could do your research on the property or AKA due diligence. Meaning that you can look into zoning, you can figure out what you need to build there, comps, financing, any information that you want to find out. And if you find that those terms don't, or any information you find out about the property doesn't meet what you're hoping for, or say you can't find that end buyer, then you would have the ability to void your contract and protect your EMD. So that's one term I've used in the past. Is there any other way that you've done that, Mark or Rob?
No, but the short answer to the question of how long do you give yourself is as long as you can negotiate. It's whatever your seller is willing to give you. That, however long that is the amount of time that you have to find an end buyer, right? So there are plenty of other people who do this. You may have heard some of their jingles saying that they can buy a house in 7 days. That's doable. If the title is clean and you've got an active title company, you can get a deal to the table in 7 days. If that's what your your seller requires, and you can find a buyer in those 7 days to step in and get the deal done, do that deal. I would prefer to have a couple of weeks. And what we typically say is, it's going to take a couple of weeks. Most people don't sell their houses in as-is condition every day. Most people assume that it's going to take some amount of time to to get a house closed. I think most people think it's going to take at least a month to get a house closed, whether they know much about it or have done it before or not. Certainly if they sold a house the old-fashioned way, the traditional way, with a buyer, with a loan and agents and inspections and all that, they know it's going to take many weeks, usually well over a month. So I like to try to get as much time as I can because that gives me more time to find my buyer. Most of the time, if I can negotiate a longer period of time and buyers ready to go and sellers ready to go, most people are happy to get their money sooner. You can always shorten the time if your buyer's ready to go. But the short answer is it's whatever you negotiate, and as long as you can get. If you can put something under contract for a couple of years, great. I would want to get paid before then, but longer is usually better. But I think most people are not stunned if you say, we should be able to get this done in 30 days or less. Does that work for you? And let that be one of your first questions to find out whatever objections they have to getting your contract signed. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about negotiating with motivated sellers. So how much money do I need to start wholesaling? The answer is possibly as little as zero, right? All you need to know is someone with a house to sell. If you know someone with a house to sell that you can get under contract for less money than someone else is willing to pay for it, you are a wholesaler and you can be wholesaling. But as Rob had said, and I think it's come up in some of the chats, to do this professionally and at scale, you're going to need to do some marketing. You're going to want to uncover more than just what you happen to already know in the way of potentially motivated sellers. So to do that, you'll need to pick a market. You'll need to have a budget. You'll need to have a message. Those are things that we'll start talking about next month, about how to handle your marketing and what kind of messaging to use and how to uncover those motivated sellers. But the beauty of wholesaling is it doesn't have to cost anything. Whatever it costs you to generate the contract, whatever it costs you to generate a wholesale agreement and an assignment agreement, and to bring those two parties together to earn your fee.
So Mr. Beckett, I'd love to get, if anybody who's in here is wholesaled, has some wisdom for the newer people, right? Because the power is in the network, the power is in the collaboration, like the mastermind exchange. Maybe somebody in here can give me their top, one top tip that they would give to anybody that's starting off wholesaling, right? Or thing to look out for, or best pro tip, right? Anybody have anything that they want to share? Now's your time, or forever hold your peace. Let's see. There's.
Tell you what.
Or Jad, you've been sharing some stuff. Do you want to give us a little more detail about any of the examples you were sharing earlier in the chat?
Well, I want to know why he lost $5,000. Right.
Well, let's get there. It's 8:15. I've got 3 slides left. Let me get through my slides, and then we'll go back.
We don't need to get through slides. Get the slides.
We'll be here all night, Bobby. You're the one who said keep it to an hour. We're at an hour 15.
And I also
understand renovation costs. Yes, we already discussed that, right? Get access to the MLS. It's fine. You don't have to be an expert in real estate, but you'll be better off. You'll be able to find more sellers and you'll be able to get more money from buyers if you understand how to analyze deals. How do you handle settlement? We just talked about it. Typically, these days, no one's in the same room. You tell your seller, hey, yep, someone's going to contact you from the title company. They'll get some information. They'll set up a convenient time. They will come and collect your paperwork and send you your money. Same thing with the buyers. You can use a traditional settlement company and go to the same room if you want to. You can't anymore right now. But really, we don't have to explain that very much. No one is looking to go to a closing table right now. This is an important one. Should I pull title on the property? Almost always. If you are putting this property under contract and you are looking for someone else to buy it. Almost
always. It's always.
It's always a good idea, but you don't have to.
You don't have to. It's crazy not to.
I know plenty of people who wholesale properties, they don't pull title on.
Thought process that it's even a viable option.
Because it's not my problem as the wholesaler. All I'm doing is getting the property under contract and finding someone else to buy it. So do I do it? Yeah. Are there wholesalers that don't? Lots. But what we're talking about here is having what's called title bring down done on the property to find out what else might be owed in this property, right? We're talking about motivated sellers with properties with problems that we're hopefully buying for 60 cents on the dollar or less. But it doesn't work if they owe 110 cents on the dollar on the house. And sellers lie. They're wrong. They're mistaken. They're duplicitous. At any rate, you shouldn't have to trust them. If you have contacts with a decent, reliable title company, and if you don't, let us know. We'll put you in touch with one. They can do what's called a bring down for little or no money to determine what the status is of liens, taxes, mortgages, whether or not the house is in probate and it needs to go through a probate process if it's an inherited property. All of these things that could affect the seller's ability to sell this property to you for the amount of money that you just put on your great wholesale contract. The only way to find out about that is to do that title bring down and have the title company go into the land records that you don't have access to. We as investors can't just log in online in most states and get this information. You have to go through a title company to get it. So that is why you want title companies to be one of the people that you are in routine contact with. This is a service that they provide, even if you have to pay a little bit for it. It is a valuable thing to do because you need to know if you've got this house under contract for $100,000, if the seller has 3 mortgages on it totaling $200,000, you don't have a deal. So you need to be able to do that. Your buyer, by the way, is going to do it as part of their process of closing anyway. Remember, I'm not buying the house as the wholesaler. I'm assigning my rights to somebody else. So this is why I said to Rob, it's not my problem because the buyer is going to do it. And if the deal is going to happen in 7 days, all of this is going to happen immediately anyway. But if I've got 30 days before I have to close, and I'm going to look under every rock to try to find the highest price buyer I can of the property, that also gives me some time to contact the title company and say, hey, can you do a bring down on this address? Tell me what's owed on this. So that in the meantime, while I'm looking for my buyer, I can confirm that they can sell the house for the amount that they said that they could. And we know that the equity is there for our buyer. It identifies if they've got like 4 or 5 tax liens that need to get cleared. Hey, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you are aware that the IRS is going to be looking for $75,000 as part of, oh, yeah, we didn't mention that. Yeah, we hear all kinds of stuff when we start pulling title and find out what's actually owed on a property. But as long as there's equity there, it all still works out. But if there's going to be a problem, the way to find out about it is to have the title company pull that title and do it sooner rather than later. Which gets to the question of who chooses the title company. You do as the wholesaler. The person that you're talking to as a seller could technically choose their own, but they don't sell houses for a living, so they don't know. You just say, I work with a great title company. They know what they're doing. They'll follow up. They'll get it done. The buyer, technically, legally, in I think most states, has the right to choose their own title company. They can choose it, but that's not the option we're giving them. Remember, as a wholesaler, we've got the deal. The buyer wants my deal. So I'm saying, hey, buyer, if you want to buy my contract rights, you're going to use my title company. And that deposit that I asked for, you'll give it to them. And when we go to close, you're going to close with them. That's part of the relationship that we want to maintain with our title company so that when we call and say, hey, can you do a bring down on this property really quick, they'll do it. So you have the deal, you have the control, you have the power, you dictate which title company gets used and who they close through. Great. There you go. Questions. That was my last slide. Now, what did I miss?
Yeah.
No, Mark, you did great also explaining a lot about titles. Sometimes you may not have a ton of time to ask the title company to do a full title search if you're trying to work with the seller and get an agreement in place, not with your end buyer, but an initial agreement. You may even be competing with other wholesalers, other realtors in some cases, depending. A tool that I use a lot for very basic and initial mortgage lien, mechanic lien, any kind of liens is also Remine. I put it in the chat for anybody who's interested. And if you, again, have MLS access, it's a great tool for that. It does not mean that it's fully inclusive of all or any liens that could be against the property, but it's definitely a good tool. If you need some information in a quick snap, you can go on there and see what's owed and things like that. I use it all the time for that.
Yep. Hey, Beck, stop the share if you get a chance. Sorry. That way we can see everybody's shining face. There we go. That's what I like to see is people.
All right. Stop.
Okay.
So going back to a couple of questions that I missed from before, Rico was asking how the virus has impacted the ability of a wholesaler to go and actually physically check out a property. Short answer is we don't always go physically check out a property. You can do this without physically going to check out the property. If you've got a screaming good deal and you know you're buying it for 60 cents or less on the dollar of what it might be worth, make the end buyer go check it out. You get it under contract. If you think you can reasonably assess the value from exterior photos that you can get off of Google Maps, photos from the seller. If you're talking to the seller and say, hey, snap a few photos of the rooms and send it to. If you have done, as Danielle said, and partner with someone locally that you can send, that you can pay, I'll give you $25, I'll give you $50. I'll tell you how this business works. Go meet this person at X time and go check the house out, take some videos and shoot some photos of it. You can find other ways so that you don't have to do it. But the last thing is, again, a motivated seller wants to sell this house. They need to sell this house. They will do what Rob is doing. They will put on a mask and they will let you go and check out the house. They want it out of their life. So it has had no impact at all on our ability to get in houses. We're in houses all the time because when somebody wants to sell it, they're willing to let you into it. Just know that it doesn't have to be you. There are other ways to get other people in it. Let's see. Looking for, so my concern is finding investors.
Right. We normally do this in the beginning, but I think it's valuable. We talked a little bit about the market, how we feel that it's still very, very active. Does anybody feel anything different? Does anybody see anything different in any other pockets? Right. I know, Teresa, last time we talked, we felt that there was a pocket with condos in DC that felt like they were struggling a little bit. Do we still feel that? This collective intelligence is super valuable for people, especially newer investors or anybody thinking about getting in the project. So, Chip, are you seeing anything different? Teresa, are you seeing anything different?
I'm still seeing hyper competitive. It's just going to depend on the location. I probably do a half a dozen pre-approval letters a week. And, the same story keeps happening.
I lost it.
Opening bid, it's listed for $199. I'm going to go in at $185 because I think that's the right number. Feedback 2 days later is it sold for $225, and there are 10 bids.
Yep. So I'm still seeing what I talked about before. There's this in-between place. If you have a single family house, it's exactly what Chip just said. I mean, the competition is insane. There are still people who can't afford those, whether it's a townhouse, a duplex, or a detached. So they want a condo, but that's typically single, young, low on cash. So they want a very inexpensive condo, and they'll put up with the small size, but they want the building to have amenities. So what's been hot for the last, decade plus has been in DC, has been taking a single family home and turning it into 2 to 4 condos. Those aren't, in my opinion, selling well at all. I'm watching them just sit because they're not small enough and cheap enough or have enough amenities for that first category target market. And they're not big enough with all the COVID inspired, I need 2 offices and a little space for us to, be able to live and work out of the house and have a little privacy. So those are now the kind of middle niche that doesn't fit either of today's markets, I don't believe. What I'm seeing in DC.
So valuable.
Rob, I have a house in Leesburg. I bought it for $366,000, and I bought it last week. I already have a contract on it. It's not even done with the rehab for $525. It's not even like they want to buy it, like they want to tie it up right now before they get into a bidding war.
Yeah.
So, and I have 2 houses going on the market on Friday, one in Northeast and one in Southeast. So I'll let you know how it goes. I had a house in Nokesville, a house in Manassas, both went under contract the first week.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Teresa makes it like it is really, real estate's hyper local. So whenever anybody talks about the market, it literally is neighborhood to neighborhood, right? And, case in point, I mean, here's a Leesburg house that is hot, right? Because they probably have a little bit more land. It's a little bit further away. And like that market is hot right now. Same thing in Manassas. I mean, we had 16 contracts in a property on Manassas this past week. It launched like New Year's Day, which was crazy, right? And then we've got some kind of conversions coming up, Teresa. So I'm concerned about those now that I hear you saying this. And so we'll, guide our investors accordingly. But real estate's all hyper local. So that's what's happening here. Good for you guys to hear that. Right. So cool.
So another question was, does your end buyer, is it better if they're a cash buyer? I guess the short answer is, yeah, it's always better if your end user investor buyer is a cash buyer showing up with a suitcase of cash. But I guess my question is, what is a cash buyer? I've said I'm a cash buyer when I'm using someone else's money because it's their cash. So they've said I could use it, so their cash is my cash. We have sold as wholesalers to first-time investors who are using a hard money loan to close on the deal. Works fine. We've sold to experienced investors who are closing with cash. That works too. Cash is always great, but to me, I'm looking for a first of all, good price, as good a price as we can get with good terms from an investor that I believe will perform. So that's why we sometimes get deals as buyers, even though we might not be the highest payer, because people know that we are going to do what we say we're going to do and we will perform. So as a wholesaler, though, come to groups like this looking for your buyers, and you'll be able to develop a buyers list that, whether it's their cash or not, will perform and close on your contract. And that's really what you're concerned about, more so than they.
Yeah, there's no traditional financing happening on these wholesale.
Right. People who do this for a living still don't use all of their own wheelbarrows of cash. That's not an efficient use of capital. So borrowing is not necessarily a bad thing. So went to a seminar a month ago and they worked on Wall Street and said they will be intentionally crashing the market around March. Know anything about that? I have not heard that any one person or group or cabal of people is going to intentionally crash the market, or whatever the market is, in March. I tend to just try to assume whatever most people think is what's going to happen is probably what won't happen, right? In my experience, be a little counterintuitive.
Now I'm nervous. I'm taking that as an inside tip. Getting out of the market.
Counterintuitive in the short term, and then just like Rob and I said, just watch inventory. This is supply and everything is supply.
Yeah. So when you say the market, right, there's the stock market, which could go up and down like super fast. And then there's the real estate market, which has a lag time. And you could see inventory levels rise. That's what I like about it. So if you're tracking the data on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis in real estate, we know where the trend is going, right? Right now, low inventory, high buyer demand. Yes, there's pockets, those pockets will need to find their price points. The market is perfect in this area. You just got to find the right price point for those products, right?
Totally agree.
So that's it.
The market is hyper efficient. Monica asks, will you be sharing our emails with the group? If you're looking at the chat box, and if you're not, go to the bottom and click on where it says chat. That'll pull up a small chat window. Bottom right hand corner of that chat window, 3 little dots. Click on the 3 little dots. First thing at the top says save chat. You can save this chat and then go back later and pull out the contact information and these questions that people have been asking here in the chat box.
You could copy and paste as well, right?
That too. Yep. Right click. Select all, copy and paste. All right. I think that might be it. Do we have other questions that we haven't covered?
Comments, concerns. Cool. Well, guys, next week we're talking about how to find deals, right?
Next month.
Next month. Sorry. Next
First
month.
Tuesday. By the way, if that's not already something you know, first Tuesday of every month we will be here. Rain, shine, Christmas, Election Day.
And by the way, this topic is being talked about by other grid leaders in the DMV area. Everybody's got their own little flavor. They've got their own secret sauce. They've got their own delivery. So if you've heard this and you're like, I don't still fully comprehend, or I didn't get to ask my question, we've got different leaders that will also be teaching this, and facilitating this discussion. So,
That's right. Find them at gridinvestor.com. And you will find all of the other people that we partner with across the country who are also active investors doing what we do and sharing it. And then speaking of sharing, sharing is caring. We'll all get more deals as this group grows and gets bigger, and we have more people showing up to these groups. And then when we can get back in person, so let people know about it if you don't mind.
I can't wait till we get back in person.
I hear you. We love the energy of the room, right? But in the meantime, leave us a review if you don't mind. Meet up on Facebook. Speaking of Facebook, you can join our closed group. It's free. Facebook /group/grid investor. You have to ask to be let in, but we will let you in. And then you will join the large and growing group of people online who share deals and information and content and best practices and databases and all kinds of great things happening there. And then you can also RSVP for that next meeting on Meetup. Right now, fortunately, we're digital, so it's a big room. But one of these days, we'll go back to being in a physical room, and we don't like working in concert halls, so we keep the room relatively small so that we can network. So you will want to RSVP to make sure you've got your spot. But probably next month, we will see you here digitally again on the Zoom, right?
Yep. At some point, what we'll probably do is open up the room to like 10 people. It'll be like a private mastermind, and then we'll still Zoom it, right?
By the way, if you're in your car and can't participate in the room, that closed Facebook group, we were also streaming to live, and I think we're streaming to live right now. So we are live on that Grid Investor Facebook group. So definitely make sure that you join that. Anybody that you know that wants to get into real estate investing, send them there, send them here, and we'll get some deals done.
Cool. Awesome, guys. Thanks for
anything
joining.
Else before we go?
I'm out. I got to go home and get some dinner.
Do that. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. We really appreciate it. Hit us up. You got our emails. Love to follow up, and we will see you here next month.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.